Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Thanks so much for being with us today. Our guest, both hours, Joe Heschmeyer. He has recovered from his time out here working with us in California, where we pretty much ran him ragged every single day he was here. And so now he's back refreshed, back home in the Midwest, ready to do 2 hours with us. And I'll tell you what, we want to talk to non-Catholics this hour. If you're not a Catholic, we'd like you to answer a simple question for us, and then we'll have a conversation. And this is always a lot of fun, and it's always just so encouraging too. We get to talk to a lot of wonderful people, and many of our Protestant brothers and sisters will call. Atheists and agnostics will call occasionally. Well, the last time I remember a Buddhist calling was a woman driving across South Dakota, said she was a Buddhist, which to me that seemed like a rarity, a South Dakota Buddhist. But anybody, if you're a South Dakota Buddhist, North Dakota Buddhist, maybe you're a Milwaukee Hindu, anybody can call and tell us why you are not Catholic today, and we'll have a conversation about it. The number is 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Our guest, as I think I said, both hours, is Joe Heschmeyer. And Joe is the author of all kinds of wonderful stuff, including his latest book, which is getting rave reviews. The early church was the Catholic Church. The Catholic Witness of the Fathers in Christianity's First 2 Centuries. Joe Heschmeyer, thanks for being with us and taking these calls.
Absolutely, my pleasure. I love that you talk about how refreshed and everything I am. Since I saw you in California, I had a 3-day parish mission in Wisconsin, and then I just came back last night from going on Matt Fradd's show in Steubenville. So I feel like of all the times you could have mentioned to everyone how refreshed
you're wiped out?
I'm like, yeah, I'm slightly. I'm very, very happy to be doing this, but I also am like, oh yeah, my own bed. That feels pretty good. So it's exciting.
By the way, you've been kind enough not to mention my strange appearance, and I appreciate that. But every now and then I got to wear this.
If I had to do that every time that was applicable.
Now, Joe, it's very difficult to have conversations with you when you act like that. I'm going to give out the number again, 888-318-7884. And every now and then I get these migraine headaches, and I got to wear the sunglasses in the studio. And it looks absolutely ridiculous. And it looks particularly ridiculous right now because I'm wearing your sunglasses, Joe. You left them in Zach's car when he took you to the airport. And
he said that they were cool and they were in the back of his car. I did not put two and two together and realize they were actually my sunglasses.
Yeah,
no wonder I thought they were so cool. I literally complimented the sunglasses. And it turns out they were my own sunglasses.
Yeah, I was wearing my sunglasses, and he goes, wear these. Joe will recognize them. But anyways, enough about that. And you know what, Joe? I have to commit myself to this when you are on, and I'm going to commit myself to it again today. I am going to do service. My life is acts of service for the next 2 hours for the listener and the caller. I'm not going to get involved in silly conversations with Joe Heschmeyer, which is one of my favorite things to do, and that's why I get bogged down. I want to have serious conversations with callers who are not Catholic, who call up and answer our question, why aren't you Catholic? And you can tell us, if maybe the answer is, I don't believe in God, or maybe the answer is something to do with us Catholics and the way that we behave. Whatever it is, or maybe it's a doctrinal disagreement you have with us. Maybe no one's ever told you about Jesus and you'd like us to tell you about Jesus. And Joe and I will jump all over that if that's what the call is about, because we love talking about Jesus. I do, Joe. I don't want to speak to you, but I love
you can safely speak for both of us.
All right,
on that one. It is nothing better.
888-318-7884, 888-318-7884 is the number. If you're not a Catholic, though, all the lines are being held for you today. 888-318-7884. And it's funny, Joe, because I think here at Catholic Answers, you and I are, at least among the folks who do, kind of in front of the microphone type work here at Catholic Answers, we're kind of in the minority. Do you know what I'm referring to?
It being cool?
No, that's definitely, to the two of us are definitely the only two cool people that, as
definitely.
You could tell by the sunglasses.
What about bearded?
No,
that's the minority.
No, we're not converts to the Catholic faith.
There were so many possible things.
Yeah.
This is one of the classic, I'm going to get very nerdy here for a second, in educational theory, saying which of these doesn't belong in a set. Those kind of questions are really bad because the more creative a child is, the less likely they are to guess the answer the teacher wants. Yeah, because the teacher wants to be like, well, these are all 4-sided and this one's 3-sided.
Right.
But like a creative kid, it maybe notice all sorts of other differences.
Yeah,
like,
right. They'll go, well, 3 of them are colors of the French flag, and one of them is not a color.
Exactly.
And you're like, wait a second, I thought it was shapes we were doing. Yeah, that's
right.
That's Sesame Street. Isn't Sesame Street awful? It's just awful for kids. One of these things is not
I'm
like
not
the
agreeing
other.
with you on that. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I went too far.
I saw a great version of it where they had like a multiple choice thing, and like there were, I think, 5 different answers, and 4 of them were obviously different in one regard. You know, it'd be like 4 blue and 1 red shapes, and then 4 of them are squares and one of them's a triangle, and then the 5th one sticks out by not sticking out. Like it's the only one that doesn't have like a special feature distinguishing it from all the other ones. And so it's a very clever kind of send up of this kind of question where you're like, well, literally any of them would be good answers. You just have to figure out why.
But I am convinced of this, Joe, and please correct me if I'm wrong. It doesn't matter what I say on the air. You're going to find something wrong with what I said.
Me personally?
Yeah,
or just
you
in
personally.
general?
You, Joe Heschmeyer, will find something wrong with what I said because you're you like picking on me,
bad
Joe.
person.
You like picking on me.
It's that's fair. It goes both ways.
You seem all hurt by that. I'm only playing with you, Joe.
No.
We're going to calls now.
I want to make sure that people don't write in taking your side.
Oh.
I'm trying to figure out how to head that off. Like,
listen, I'll be tell you right now. I will say Anne, because Anne is one of my favorite people, and you are not one of Anne's favorite people. And so when you appear on the show with me, Anne will write to defend me, and you don't have to.
Exactly.
Anne. Joe and I are good friends, but I do like Anne better than I like you. I just want you to know that, Joe.
That's fair.
And if you met her, you would like her better than you like me. 888-318-7884. Let's start with Tim in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio. Tim, why aren't you Catholic?
I'm not Catholic because as the last three or 4 years, we've been leaning toward learning more and more about the Catholic Church and loving the local radio station WAOB, which stands for We Are One Body, which has a lot of silent contemplation time, which goes against a lot of the noisy radio stations that we don't appreciate in the morning. And we have visited St. Emma's Monastery in Greensburg. We like reading about the saints. And
that led you away from the Catholic Church?
No. This past weekend, I stopped by to get a bulletin. And as people were coming out of Mass, they were walking by a table that was selling lottery tickets. It was a fundraiser. They also have what is called Night at the Races once a month. And the way they raise money, I want to give the benefit of the doubt that the priest is cautioning people not to think of it as truly gambling. But the way my wife and I were raised, they wouldn't even sell singing quartet records on a Sunday, and we were cautious about that. And so my wife it was a real turnoff for her in that respect.
A little bit like the money changers in the temple?
Yes, she mentioned that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Joe?
Yeah, I think that's a great objection. I think let me clarify what I mean by that. I don't think that's a good reason not to be Catholic, but I do think it's a legitimate thing to grapple with and say, should that be happening or not? Because I think so often we take it for granted. You know, you get like bingo in the church hall with the old ladies, and there's kind of a classic trope of that. But it's worth asking, well, if they're paying to play the bingo, is that small stakes gambling? And if it is that a problem? And you'll find Catholics who disagree on both of those questions. Some will say, this is not really gambling in any real sense. The person paying $5 for a bingo card, or who's, giving a couple bucks to a raffle, they're more doing it as a donation, or they're just paying for the enjoyment of getting to play, and they're not really doing it as like an investment strategy of like, oh, I really want to win this money, the way people will sometimes approach gambling. And And then the second is that even if it is gambling, is that harmless? And it's not that gambling of itself is always and everywhere immoral. Francis de Sales, in Introduction to the Devout Life, gives a clear distinction that I think is one that would be right to heed, and one that we kind of don't take seriously now. He says dice, cards, and the like games of hazard are not merely dangerous amusements like dancing, but they are plainly bad and harmful, and therefore they are forbidden by the civil as well as the ecclesiastical law. In other words, once upon a time, gambling was forbidden both by the church and by the state, but specifically games of chance, not games of skill. And he explains that these kind of games are unreasonable because the winner has neither skill nor industry to boast of, and so it's contrary to reason. And he goes on, and all of the other reasons you might expect. That there's plenty of stories of people having their lives ruined through gambling addiction and the like. I like Francis de Sales' distinction between games that require skill and games that are just purely chance. So something like a raffle, that's purely chance. Something like a slot machine is purely chance. But even like a poker game, arguably there's something closer to skill there. Someone is making money because they're good at kind of reading other people, or they're good at kind of playing the room. That looks more like an ordinary job, frankly. That looks more like people who invest in the stock market or who fill in the blank. Like if we were to say that any kind of investment where there's uncertainty is immoral, well, then we would have to really shut down much of the modern economy. And I don't think that's something you'll find a clear warrant for in Scripture or in the Church's tradition. So all that's to say, I agree with you that I think a raffle is a bad idea. I think it's a small bad idea because I don't think anyone's losing big sums of money. But I think it's something that we'd be good to take to heart because it's something we tend to overlook as Catholics. But none of that, I think, should stop you from becoming a Catholic. You can object to the parish raffle and still believe Jesus founded the church.
I agree.
Okay, I wanted to come back to you, see what you thought about that. Okay.
I really like it. I'll talk to my wife more about it.
I wonder too
Right.
if some of these things have been maintained despite the fact of great sociological changes. That is, in the say the 1920s at a Catholic parish, if there was bingo night, that was a social night for everybody as much as anything because it was the parishioners who were coming and they were hanging out together, having fun. It was a couple bucks, but that was just But now it's people who are not associated with the parish in many places. It's just like the parish running a gambling hall. So it's a different thing than it was maybe 100 years ago.
I see. Some leftovers.
That's what I'm thinking. I don't know. I wonder what Joe thinks about that.
I think that's exactly right. And I tried to allude to that earlier. I mean, think about it this way. If you go to see a speaker, and let's say there's a cost for the ticket to go see the speaker, but the speaker has a door prize, and so somebody wins a door prize. You're probably not saying, I'm going to buy a lot of tickets so I can like triple my chances of, winning the door prize or something like that. You're not treating it like gambling. Even though you're investing some money and you might get a reward at the end, you're going for other reasons. And I think if you approach something like bingo or parish raffle or fill in the blank in that spirit, that's not really the spirit of gambling. But I think you're right that a lot of places, even if they started off innocuously like that, it can become something that's not of a Christian spirit. I'd say for all of the reasons we've kind of discussed so far. And then sometimes you'll also get just a spirit of drunkenness, we'll say, just to put it very bluntly. Some of these parish events, they're a little too free with the beer and the wine, and parishioners overindulge. And I think it's something to be on the lookout for from a Christian perspective of any kind.
Excellent.
Thank you. And I really appreciate the call because it's something that we don't talk enough about internally as Catholics about, well, how does this look to people from the outside? Because we might say, oh, it's all a bunch of harmless fun and it brings in some dollars for the parish school or something. And parish schools are constantly, struggling. But But it does have another side to it as well, like the person who comes and goes, wait a second, what are these Catholics all about? So I appreciate the call. We've got to take a quick break. The number is 888-318-7884. Why aren't you Catholic? Joe Heschmeyer is our guest. If you'd like to talk about why you're not Catholic, give us a call, 888-318-7884.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Wherever you are in the world, you can access the EWTN Global Catholic Network. It's everywhere. You can get EWTN's great Catholic programming on your car radio, at home on your TV, computer, or smart speaker. With EWTN's app, you can take EWTN everywhere on your phone or mobile device. If you want your news in print, turn to EWTN's paper of record, the National Catholic Register. EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Joe Heschmeyer is our guest, both hours today, and we'd like to talk with non-Catholics today. If you're not a Catholic and you want to talk with us, give us a call. Tell us why you're not Catholic. 888-318-7884. 888-318-7884. Maybe you're not Catholic because you feel you have found something better. Maybe you are not Catholic because you're not convinced by Catholic arguments. Maybe you're not Catholic for some other reason, and we can maybe help you with it, or we can just have a good conversation. We love those. 888-318-7884. And we publish a lot here at Catholic Answers, and we sell it all over at shop.catholic.com. And right now is our annual spring sale at shop.catholic.com. It's store-wide. Everything's on sale, 10 to 25% off, in some cases more. And you can get $5 shipping on your whole order. So order as much as you want at these sale prices and then get $5 shipping on the whole thing. Just head over to shop.catholic.com. I'm reluctant to read that ad because our last caller said he wasn't Catholic because he thought we were a little bit too forward about looking for the filthy lucre, and here I am asking you to go shop it. But we're a lay apostolate, and we support ourselves by publishing things. That's one of the ways we support ourselves, and you can get all, and we think it's good, helpful stuff. We have Joe's book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church. 888-318-7884 is the number to call here. If you want to find us online and get those great deals, just head over to shop.catholic.com. Joe, thanks again for taking the time to be with us for these 2 hours. I didn't realize that you had been traveling so much. So you go to Ohio to see Matt Fradd. I heard Matt Fradd this is truly what I heard. And then I'm going to the caller, but I just want to ask you about this. I heard that he was over in Ukraine or something.
He was in Poland, actually.
Oh, Poland.
Near the Ukrainian border. One of the reasons I'm not actually complaining about like being tired or jet lagged is that Matt went to Poland, had come back, did like a couple shows, one in the morning and then one in the evening with me, and then yesterday he flew down to Florida. So it sounded like he's just been on planes a lot.
Yeah,
but it was beautiful. Like he got to help. I think it was an orphanage of the hearing impaired, like deaf children.
Wow.
They delivered a bunch of food to them, and yeah, it was one of these situations. They had a connection with a priest, and somebody chartered a plane, and I don't know. It was an incredible, really show of support, and I think people really chipped in to help out Ukrainians who were in need and were coming across the border.
Good for Matt. So your show, I forget, does he record it live? Can you already get it over at
yeah,
Pints
so
with Aquinas?
He does both. He does pre-records, but we did live, and so you are one of like 11,000 people. No, 11,000 people have seen it, but I guess not you actually, since you asked that question. So but it was, in fairness, it was during your own show. So
Also, I wouldn't have
we
watched that
recorded
otherwise.
it.
Anyways,
Yeah, fair enough.
I'm
fair
sorry,
enough.
Joe.
I was giving
Darn
you
it,
the
I was
benefit
trying to
of the doubt.
resist. I was trying so hard to resist.
I was just teed it up there, seeing what was going to happen. I got to make sure that I look like the innocent victim and not vice versa.
I know. Get everybody, including Ann, on your side. The number is 888-318-7884. 3 of our 6 lines are open right now. If you're not Catholic, we'd love to hear why you're not Catholic. We're going to go now to David in North Carolina, listening on 540 AM. Happy to have you, David. Why aren't you Catholic?
Well, I was telling you, screener, I was raised Catholic, but about 30 years ago I married a Methodist, and so I've been practicing Methodist. I've been studying the Jewish, I don't know if you want to call them religion or people, and if Christ was a Jew, and why don't we know more about the Jew? Why aren't we all Jews instead of Catholics, Methodists, Protestants, Lutherans, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, okay, those are a couple of great questions. So the first is Judaism has built in this messianic expectation. That is, if you read the Jewish scriptures, the Old Testament, there is this anticipation for and explicit prophecies about the coming of the Messiah. And one of those prophecies that's really interesting involves the second temple. So you've got the first temple built by Solomon. It gets destroyed. There's a second temple that's sin built. And in Malachi, God promises that he himself will enter the temple. And that is apparently in some different way than he was already in the temple. And so the whole message of Jesus of Nazareth is that he is the fulfillment of Israel's messianic expectation and hope, and that he is the God of Israel come to visit his people, come to enter his temple, and to take possession of his people. And in fulfilling that messianic expectation and hope, he also opens the doors to salvation for the Gentiles and opens the doors to the church for the Gentiles. Because as far back as Abraham, God promised that through Abraham all nations would be blessed. In other words, that this whole series of promises, the choosing of the Jews and the people of God, the Abrahamic, because even before they're Jews, you've got the Israelites, that all of that is not just for their own personal good. It's also for the good of their Gentile neighbors. It's also for the good of all of us. And so Christianity is the fulfillment of that. So that's why we're not all just Jews. We are the new Israel, as St. Paul and others say. Because new Israel in the sense that it's not like we got rid of Israel, got rid of Judaism, and scrapped it in favor of another thing, but rather that it was always heading towards having a Messiah and having the doors open for the Gentiles. Those promises are found throughout the Old Testament. Isaiah 66 talks about the nations coming to worship God. Malachi 1:11 talks about the true sacrifice being offered by the nations, that is, by the Gentiles around the world. That all of that's not some crazy new thing that Jesus invents. This was the expectation the whole time. Whether people understood it or not, these are what the promises were. So Christianity is a fulfillment of the promises made to the Israelites, and so we live in an era in which God has fulfilled those promises. He has more promises yet to be fulfilled until the second coming and the culmination of all things. But that's why we're not just still waiting for the Messiah. He's here. To the second question of why be Catholic instead of Methodist? Well, I'd say the simplest reason is that Jesus promises to build a church, and he doesn't build the Methodist church. John Wesley does that. Jesus Christ builds the Catholic Church. And there's a bunch of other reasons. The Eucharist, the structure of the church, the nature of what the church is. But I think in terms of just a simple answer, that's what I would say.
I just want to see, what do you think about that? Does that make sense to you?
It makes a lot of sense. He answers a lot of great questions that I have. But in the Old Testament says, God said that 10 Gentiles will come to a Jew and say, take us with you, for you have God. And where in the Old Testament does God say that he's going to come in as a man? And if you believe in the 10 Commandments, God keeps saying, there's only me, there's only me, there's only me, there's nobody else. Don't believe anybody else. It's just me. I'm not coming in as a man. And so that's just a little confusing there.
Yeah, no. You're absolutely right. There's no other God than God. Jesus isn't some second God. That's not the nature of the Trinity. But in terms of the Messianic prophecies, including the Messiah being God, you have some that are more subtle hints. The promise that both gold and frankincense will be offered to the Messiah. Gold is what you give to a king. Frankincense is the sacrificial incense you give to God. It's what you put on a sacrifice. But then you also have places like Isaiah 9, verse 6. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. That's about as explicit as it gets, that the Messiah who is to come will be revered and honored and worshipped as God, not just as David or as a mighty king. And then you have other places. The psalmist saying, "The Lord says to my Lord." Jesus points out that this makes it very clear that there is a God of Jacob who's also a son of Jacob.
David, thanks. You probably hear the music.
You guys are awesome.
Yeah, thank you, David. You are as well. If you want to hang on, we'll send you a copy of Joe's book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church. Maybe that will be of interest to you and of help to you. And I'd love to hear from you again. We'll be right back with more Why Aren't You Catholic? On Catholic Answers Live. Most of us Catholic parents agree our number one goal in life is to pass on the faith to our children. But here's the bad news. Today's world has a million ways to steal your kid's soul. Don't be afraid, says Father Sebastian Walsh. God loves your children even more than you do, and He desires their salvation more than anything. In his groundbreaking new book, Always a Catholic, Father Walsh shows you how to cooperate with God to bring about the fulfillment of His will for your kids. Always a Catholic reminds us that keeping our kids in the faith is about the way we live our Catholicism in our own lives and as a family from day to day. Order your copy of Always a Catholic by visiting shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. It's free, and you'll have instant access to our daily broadcast, the schedule of upcoming shows, and you'll even be able to search the archive and listen to thousands of past shows. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
Have you enrolled in the Catholic Answers School of Apologetics? Let me ask you a more important question. Do you believe as a Catholic that you have an obligation to share the Catholic faith? In fact, the Church has answered this question, and the answer is that all confirmed Catholics are obliged to share the faith. It's actually in canon law. Catholic Answers is here to help you fulfill that obligation. Our School of Apologetics courses will equip you to help all the people you come in contact with understand what the Church teaches and why. A great place to start is with all the Catholics in your life. Learn the art of apologetics from the best of the best and start sharing the gospel today. Visit schoolofapologetics.com. That's schoolofapologetics.com.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. Joe Heschmeyer, our guest. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Sarah's running the board. Edgar's on the phones. Mary's on the video. And we're just happy you're here. And we really are happy you're here. We appreciate that you take the time with us. And we're asking you, if you're Catholic, to hang on, though, because today we want to talk to non-Catholics about why you are not Catholic. If you're not a Catholic, maybe you're like, I've always wanted to, tell a Catholic about, why these Catholic beliefs are wrong. That would be a good motivation to call us. Or maybe you're curious about something Catholic and you're like, this has always kept me out. Whatever. If you're not a Catholic, we'd love to hear from you and have that conversation. 888-318-7884, 888-31-TRUTH. Let's go to Cincinnati, Ohio. Listening on 740 AM, Julian is in Cincinnati, Ohio. Thanks, Julian, for the call. Why aren't you Catholic?
Well, every time you say something like the early church was a Catholic church, it makes my stomach boil. It really does.
Joe said it. That was Joe.
I know Joe said that.
Okay, all right.
I hear that.
Because I don't want to boil your stomach.
But here's my question. So right before Paul left the earth, or died, he said that grievous wolves will come and destroy the church and spread all kinds of heresies. And he also said that there will be antichrists. Many antichrists will come. Now, antichrist, from the angle of not particularly against Christ, but in place of Christ. And so I see that the Catholic Church has put itself in place of Christ, and therefore Christ is sort of like in the background over there. His mother is elevated, and all the other things that the Catholic Church is known for.
Okay, how about this? I want to come back to you, Julian, because that was a lot of very interesting points. Let's get Joe's reaction to that about the church being the Antichrist, and then we'll go back to Julian and we'll have a little conversation. Joe, what do you make of that?
Can I actually ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
When does this Antichrist church replace the real church in Julian's view? Or Julian, in your view, like when? Yeah.
Well, the Antichrist, the word Antichrist doesn't necessarily mean against Christ, but it also means in place of Christ, meaning the church puts itself on the throne of Christ and have, the
right. But I mean, historically, when do you think that happens?
Oh, right after the last saint died.
Oh, wow.
After Paul died and all of that.
So you think the gates of hell just like immediately overtake the church?
It was a slow thing. It was a slow death to choose.
Well, I guess I'm trying to pin down. It sounds like immediately after the death of the last apostle. Doesn't sound like a slow death at all. I mean, if we say Christianity only lasts 70 years, I mean, think back 70 years from now. That was not very long. That would be a pretty failed movement. I guess so. I've got a few thoughts about what you're saying. The first is you're absolutely right that St. Paul says in Acts 20:29, I know that after my departure, fierce wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. And from among your own selves will arise men speaking perverse things to draw away the disciples after them. But then he tells them to therefore be alert. In other words, the notice to the church is to be traditional, to not accept any new teaching. Like the reason that as Catholics we reject Protestantism is we know where Protestantism comes from, and it's not from the 1st century. It's from the 16th century, or depending on the denomination, even later than that. And St. Paul tells us to watch out for that. Like if someone comes along and starts teaching something new, that's a big red flag. And so St. Jerome makes the point that if you can trace where any Christian denomination comes from, and it's not to Jesus Christ, then you know it's not the true church. You know it's not the church founded by Christ. You know it's one of the ones that we're warned about in Scripture. So I like that you're on the lookout because St. Paul tells us to be. But I think you've made a mistake in throwing out the one church that can claim to go back to the time of Christ. Second, your concern is that the church is putting itself in the place of Christ. But in actual fact, St. Paul says that the church is the continuation of Christ. So in Ephesians 1, he says that God, in verse 22, he says that God has put all things under Christ's feet and has made him the head over all things for the church, which is his body, the fullness of him who fills all in all. In other words, the beauty of Christianity is that God takes on a body for the first time. That's the mystery of the incarnation. The second person of the Trinity takes to himself humanity. He takes a human body. And Paul's point is that even after Christ is ascended into heaven, the incarnation continues on in the church, which is the fullness of Christ who fills all in all. That's what he says. That's explicitly there, Ephesians 1:23. So the church isn't putting herself in the place of Christ. She's saying she is the body of Christ, that she is the bride of Christ, and the two become one flesh, that she is totally united with Christ, such that to separate her from Christ would be like taking the head off of a body, or trying to divorce a lawful union between man and wife who've become one. It's impossible, and it would be a sort of spiritual decapitation. That's not us replacing Christ. That's us being, the fullness of Christ. Head and members, head and body. And then finally, this idea that the church immediately falls into apostasy and error would totally invalidate Christianity. In other words, if that really happened, that would be a great argument against Christianity. Go back to the book of Acts, and Gamaliel makes this challenge. And he points out that there are all of these people, or Gamaliel, I guess is how people pronounce it. He points out there are all these messianic movements, and the false ones peter out and they end. And so if Christianity is the real deal, it has to survive. It has to survive for more than a generation, because that's what distinguishes it from a false messianic movement. You can find this in Acts 5, beginning in verse 34. He says, "If this plan or undertaking is of men, it will fail, but if it is of God, you will not be able to overthrow them." So if you say that the devil overthrew the church and the Antichrist replaced the true church, the logical consequence of that is you have to say Jesus isn't really the Christ, because the real Christ will have a church not overcome by the gates of hell.
Okay, so Julian, what do you make of all that?
Well, I hear all Joe is saying, but here's the problem. The church did not disappear. What the church did, it went underground for the 1260 years that the Catholic Church reigned, during what we call, as Protestants, the Dark Ages. So during those 1260 years, and again according to the book of Revelation, the church went underground while the false church of the Christ system reigned for that time.
Wow.
So I think there's two problems with that kind of theory. The first is that there's just literally no historical evidence for an underground church for 1260 years. But the second is that Jesus explicitly tells the church, "You are the light of the world, and a city set on a hill cannot be hid," Matthew 5:14. And he tells them to go out and make disciples of all nations. I mean, historically, it's the Catholic Church who's evangelizing Europe, the Catholic Church evangelizing North Africa, the Catholic Church evangelizing into India. This so-called true church that failed to live out what Christ said to do doesn't look or sound like the true church. They're not a light of the world. They're not a city set on a hill. They apparently not only can be hid, they decide to be hidden, and they're not living out the great evangelization for more than 1,000 years. Like that, if such a group of Christians did exist, we could know definitively they were a false church. The true church, Christ says in Matthew 13, is like a mustard seed that flourishes, it flowers, it grows into a mustard tree, the largest of all of the plants in the garden. And so the true church explodes in size, and all the persecutions in the world are unable to stop true Christianity, the Catholic Church, from growing into the largest church in the world and the largest church in all of history.
Julian? Did we lose Julian, or what's up? Oh, hang on, Julian. Julian, did you want to respond to what Joe said?
Well, I would say the church was hiding in underground for its survival. And so we look at the Waldensian Christians, who the false church or the Antichrist church persecuted, and they had to go underground, just like the church is hidden right now in places like China and places where they're being persecuted. You cannot tell me that the churches in these countries that's been persecuted are not shining their lights. Actually, their lights are shining even brighter through persecution.
Oh, I agree that the churches in those places have their lights are definitely shining. But those are real places. We know of the Christians in China. There's plenty of historical evidence that they exist. The kind of imaginary invisible church for 1260 years, there's no record of any such church existing because it's not real. If you go back and read like the early controversies within early Christianity, you've got conflicts from the Catholics against like the Gnostics or against the Donatists or various other groups. But there's no Catholics against like the Protestants in the early church. There's nobody who looks and sounds like a Baptist or an Adventist or fill in the blank. Those people they don't exist. And I would say if like the person claiming that they do, that there's a 1260 year history, you should be able to point to that, because we can point to the history of the underground church in China. We can show that church exists and that it's doing good work on the ground, even if it is, as you rightly point out, doing it often very quietly. It is still living out this goal of being a city on a hill, still living out the goal of evangelizing all nations, even at the risk of their own life. A church that failed to do that just literally just for the sake of its own survival didn't evangelize, would be effectively an apostate church, because it would just fail to be living out Jesus's message by valuing their physical safety over the power of the gospel.
I would just love to continue this conversation, but every single line is full, Julian. So I'm going to have to leave it there, and maybe some more, maybe others will follow up with some other points related to your argument. I don't know, but this is such a fruitful and helpful conversation. I'd love to send you a book. I don't know if you want a book from us, because Joe's book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, actually boiled your stomach. And I know how that
the title. Maybe you should read the book and see
I'll
if he
send him
still
the book.
agrees or disagrees. Yeah.
But if he doesn't want it, what's one of our lesser titles? Let's send him A Teacher of Strange Things, who Jesus was, what he taught, and why people still follow him. It's a minor title that we have.
Who wrote that one?
Well, I mean, it's a minor title, but I got a major author. Let's take a break. We'll be right back. We've got every single line full with folks who are not Catholic and want to tell us why they're not Catholic. We're super grateful for those calls, so I don't want to keep you waiting. Right back with more Why Aren't You Catholic? With Joe Heschmeyer on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. We'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Do you love sharing the gospel and want to learn to be more effective? Join the St. Paul Street Evangelization online School of Evangelization. You will learn to build bridges of trust and make disciples by befriending strangers, proclaiming the gospel, inviting people to the church, and praying with others. We'll ask for a pledge of financial support, but if you are unable to give, we'll give you a membership at no cost. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
There are some people who are super imminent. Now, the most imminent example would clearly be the person of Moses, as such a luminescent character, reflecting the divine glory, that the Israelites could not physically look at him.
Wow.
The man had to veil his face because he was like this giant walking light bulb.
Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders. Tonight, 11 Eastern, on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. Joe Heschmeyer, our guest. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. I think I'm doing a very good job just serving the caller and the listener today and not getting involved in trivial arguments with Joe Heschmeyer, which is one of the most fun things to do. I don't ever want to get in a serious argument with Joe Heschmeyer because he'll beat me, but if I can keep it on the grounds of triviality, I feel like I can hold my own as a trivial and maybe even slightly petulant person. I feel like I can hold my own against you, Joe.
I invite the back and forth. I enjoy it, but you're right that it makes for bad radio. So for the sake of everyone else.
All right, Alex in Kansas, listening to EWTN. And I say Kansas like that because that's where Joe is. Listening to EWTN on Channel 130 Sirius XM satellite radio. Thanks for the call, Alex. Why aren't you Catholic?
You're doing an excellent job, by the way, Cy.
Oh, I like Alex. Free book coming, Alex.
Kansas are too nice. That's the problem.
They're not too nice. They're just nice.
Yeah, we're just nice. It's just ontologically part of our state of being.
Right.
Yes, exactly. Amen.
Right.
Amen.
And I don't want to say what's ontologically part of our California state of being. It's something different.
Well,
are you guys making a state pun when you say state of being?
Oh.
Anyway.
Yeah.
I see what you did there with what I did there.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Right.
So I would say the primary reason I'm not Catholic or I'm not convinced of becoming a Roman Catholic is because I don't think that the Vatican I understanding of the papacy is coherent with what the apostles would have understood and what the church fathers taught.
That's a very clear, very strong argument. I'm going to tell you, Alex, I think that's the best argument against Catholicism in this sense. If the church is right about the papacy, everybody should be Catholic. And if the church is wrong about the papacy, nobody should be Catholic. Like, that's the real make or break kind of issue.
Somebody should write a book about that, Joe.
Yeah, I mentioned that in the first chapter of my book, Pope Peter, that looks at the historic claim of the papacy, not just in like the first few centuries, but specifically in the first century with St. Peter. What's the understanding? What's the biblical evidence for the papacy? But in your view, Alex, when do you see the papacy arising?
The Vatican I.
Like, who's the first pope? Yeah, who's the first pope? Well,
and again, that's going to depend on how we define it, because again, I'm not convinced of the Vatican I understanding understanding. I am convinced of the first among equals, so I would definitely say it would have been Peter. And going with what Shazinski says, I think that Rome had a primacy because of its political position and the fact that Peter and Paul both died in that city. And so, for me, a first among equals is not a problem. I think that after Vatican I, there is a substantial departure from that, though.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Do you give what they call the primacy of honor that the Eastern theologians speak of? Okay.
Yeah.
So the original understanding of primacy of honor doesn't just mean honor in the way we use the term today. It meant like authority. That honor was a synonym for authority. And it was a recognition, not of like dignity, but in much more, maybe I guess the way sort of that we use it with judges when we say your honor. It's a respect for an office. It's a respect for a certain position. And so a primacy of honor in this sense, in the earliest sense, actually meant that the Bishop of Rome, the successor of Peter, had a unique authority that nobody else had. But I'd rather just focus on the biblical stuff, if you're good with that. I would start with Luke 22. I know Catholics like to start with Matthew 16, and I love Matthew 16. But in Luke 22, at the Last Supper, the apostles are arguing about which of them is the greatest. And rather than discourage this, Jesus tells them what Christian greatness consists of. That he holds up himself as the model and says that true greatness is to serve. And so he lays out what we call servant leadership today. And then he affirms the apostolic nature of the church and says that you 12 will be, you were with me in my trials, you'll have thrones judging the 12 tribes. And then he singles out in the very next verse one of the 12 and says, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you, that's you all, or you plural, that he might sift you all like wheat. But then he switches from the plural to the singular and says, but I've prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brethren. In other words, he's just said servant leadership is what Christian leadership and authority looks like, and that the apostles have this and will always have this in the church, even into heaven. They'll always have this kind of servant leadership authority. And then he says to one of them that he's got this servant leadership authority even in relation to the other 11 with the line, strengthen your brethren. That in the face of demonic assault on the entire apostolic foundation of the church and demonic assault on all 12, Jesus singularly prays for one of them, Simon Peter, and strengthens his faith so he can strengthen that of the rest. That, I think, is everything you need to hold to the Catholic claim in terms of Peter having a unique and special role, and one that predates anything about like Roman political importance or anything like that. That there's something in the role of Peter, and then continues on with his successors. What do you think of that idea, Alex? Does that jive? Does that make sense?
I don't think that's a good or bad argument. I think it's just a good argument for the safety of the church. I mean, because it includes the other apostles and it includes Peter himself. And yeah, we can talk about the fact that Peter is the head, but it is the certainty that, just like what Jesus says in Matthew 16, the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. And so for me, that passage, though, we could argue, yeah, you know what it talks about, we could emphasize the importance of Peter in that. It doesn't get me to that Vatican I position that I'm concerned about. I'm completely in agreement.
Is there something particularly within the Vatican I definition? Like, what specifically about the Vatican I understanding of the papacy? Because it seems like Peter's not just one among equals here. He seems to be giving a unique authority. So, is there something more that Vatican I offers that you say I don't see that part?
Well, and I would just say on the unique authority, Paul was given a unique authority to preach to the Gentiles. So, a unique authority does not entail being the head of the church.
No, I agree with you that a unique authority doesn't entail being the head of the church. I think that's a misreading of Galatians 1 to say Paul's given a unique authority. When he calls himself an apostle to the Gentiles, he's not saying Peter's not allowed to preach to Gentiles. That goes contrary to Paul's entire message, and Peter's the first to preach to the Gentiles. But I do think you're right that someone can have a unique role in the church, and that doesn't mean they're the head. My point was that Peter's unique role is to be the servant leader of the other servant leaders, and that's why I'm saying he seems to be given a unique headship.
Yeah, well, no, and I would agree with that. I just don't think it gets to the Vatican I position, because I think when you get to Vatican I, you have a pope that cannot err. And I think Pope Honorius is a great example of a pope that certainly did err. And I would not say that he was a heretic and that his failures were a proof that the church collapsed. But any bishop can err, and it is through the Holy Spirit working through other bishops that they are brought back. And so that's what I would say about Luke 22, is that Peter had a specific mission to restore the other apostles, and Christ restored him. But to me, that's not a proof or a disproof for the papacy. That to me is a proof that he had a specific role and task.
I see. That makes sense. When we're talking about infallibility, I want to agree with you that just like Pope Honorius, just like St. Peter in Galatians 2, the whole encounter in Antioch that St. Paul recounts, popes can and do err. Papal infallibility, despite its name, doesn't actually mean the Pope can't err, or that there's no role bishops may have in drawing the Pope back if he makes a mistake. And I think you're absolutely right with that. And I think we see that even in the modern world, where if Pope Francis says something, other bishops may speak up and say, you need to clarify this, or what do you mean by that? Or, and we see popes even today speaking out. All of that's totally compatible with Vatican I's understanding of papal infallibility. That understanding is just that when the Pope defines a doctrine, that definition is infallible. Not that the Pope himself, like in everything he says and does. Does that distinction help? Does that make sense? Because nothing in Vatican I is contrary to the possibility of Honorius deciding something wrongly in the course of his pontificate.
That distinction helps. I definitely do appreciate that. I think you still have an issue though with, can a pope determine a church council, or is it the church council that determines what's doctrine? Because I know that we've had church councils that popes did not preside over and did not say were de facto part of the faith. And I'm thinking it was the 6th or 7th ecumenical council that the Pope did not preside over and had nothing to say about. And it was only later that he said, "Yeah, this is right." But the Church never said, "Oh, thank goodness, because the Pope has said that this is acceptable and part of the doctrine, we can get along with ourselves." Because the Orthodox have been getting along just fine, and I put that in air quotes, just fine, as they're having their own issues. But they've gotten along just fine for the last 1,000 years.
Yeah, I think that you're right to have the air quotes there. The Orthodox actually have some confusion about how many councils there are. And the source of that confusion is that they have no principle by which to determine which is and isn't a valid council. So the instances I would point you to, there are two. The so-called Second Council of Ephesus, which is better known as the Robber Council, and then the Council of Chalcedon. So in 449, the Second Council of Ephesus is convened, and it is heretical. But it has all of the auspices of being a true ecumenical council, except that the papal legate just says one word, contradictator, where he rebukes the entire council and goes home, and the Pope declares it a robber council, not a true council. And neither the East nor the West accepts it today. But the only reason that anyone can really point to is that Pope Leo doesn't accept it. And instead, the Council of Chalcedon in 451, which is Orthodox, which is the basic... Chalcedonian Christianity is something that Catholics, Orthodox, and Protestants are all united on. That's something that the Pope has a huge role in what's called the Tome of Leo. And there they read that this letter that the Pope has written and say that the Apostle Peter has spoken through Leo. And so there's very much this role that, not that the Pope has to make every decision at the council, of course not, but rather that if the Pope says X isn't a valid council, it's not a valid council in either the East or the West. And that's very hard to explain away historically, except by reference to this unique authority that the Bishop of Rome has always had.
Alex, we're going to leave it there. I think if you'd like it, I'd love to send you a copy of Joe's book, Pope Peter, Defending the Church's Most Distinctive Doctrine in a Time of Crisis. If you'd like it, just hang on the line. Edgar will get your information and we'll send it to Kansas. And if you're on the line, please stay on the line because Joe's going to stay with us for another hour. So many great calls coming up. Really would like to get to everybody. We asked you to call if you're not Catholic, and some folks have been generous enough to take us up on that invitation. And I don't want to lose anybody. Really want to have those conversations. So hang on. We'll be right back with more Joe Heschmeyer on Catholic Answers Live and a bunch of callers who have called to tell us why they are not Catholic. Right back after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Doing a really good job today, by the way, as host. I'm being a really good servant of the listener and the caller. I don't usually like to congratulate myself while I'm on the air, but I really do feel I'm doing a good job today. Our guest is Joe Heschmeyer, the author of a whole bunch of things, including The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, The Catholic Witness of the Fathers in Christianity's First 2 Centuries, a wonderful book, and we'd love to give it away. You can also get it over at shop.catholic.com, of course, or you can get it anywhere else that good Catholic books are sold. Joe, you are back with us for this hour, right?
I sure am.
And thank you for doing that. Thank you for being back, because there are a load of people who have taken us up on our offer to call and tell us why they are not Catholic. And myself, I think it's producing wonderful conversations. I love these discussions.
This is one of my favorite kind of shows to do, if I'm being totally frank. This and Kids Show, because you just get really good questions. People are really wondering. And not just wondering in an idle way, but wondering in a way that I think really matters.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Frank. We're going. No, Joe. Sorry, I thought you said something about being Frank. But 888-318-7.
No. The lack of laughter is not understanding the joke.
It's not a joke. It's an imitation of a joke that's so dumb that you're supposed to find the imitation of the joke.
See.
Hilarious that someone would say something that dumb.
Meta humor.
It's meta. Right. Well, not in the no. You can't say meta anymore because Mark Zuckerberg has taken that term.
Humor.
Right. Yeah. You can't. Anyways, Angus in Nebraska is next, listening on Spirit Catholic Radio, as you would be if you're in Nebraska. Angus, you've been patient. I thank you so much. You're very welcome. Why aren't you Catholic?
I'm actually kind of an atheist.
Kind of?
Kind of, very much so.
Okay. All right. So you're not Catholic because you don't believe in God?
I don't use atheist, and I don't say I don't believe in God.
Oh, okay.
I just say that the God of the Jews doesn't exist in my mind. Same thing. Just a different way of putting it.
Okay.
Well, I think that's actually a good distinction, because someone could obviously believe in God and not believe in the specific claims about the Christian God.
Yeah. And it's specifically the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that you're like, no, that's...
And that's what I wanted to talk to you guys about, because when the fellow earlier, I was driving, and when the fellow earlier said, why aren't you guys all Jews?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's something that I've always kind of wondered. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't maybe touch upon the fact that I just wrote a bunch of notes while I was on hold forever. Oh, hold on. Let me say this.
Now, that was kind of a dig at us.
You are doing a fantastic job today.
You're now my favorite kind of atheist. Thanks, Angus.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm not an atheist, but
kind of, though.
I just don't have a God existing in my mind.
Yeah. All right, so...
I was wondering... Yeah.
No,
I
go
was
ahead.
wondering if you touch on, in the Old Testament and the New Testament, why are so many names, and I understand it's in English, right? Why are none of the names correct?
Can you clarify what you mean?
You've
what do
said
you mean?
You've said it a million times while I was driving. You've said St. Paul. Well, that wasn't St. Paul. That was Saul of Tarsus, and he was a Jew. And I'm wondering why everyone pushes that St. Paul when he
goes
was a Jew.
by Paul. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm not
100%
sure I'm tracking the question. So if this totally misses the mark, please feel free to clarify.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah, a lot of people in the first century had both a Jewish and a Greek name, and so in that particular case,
that.
Yeah. But so yeah, I guess could you explain a little more? What's the nature of the objection?
Well,
why call him by the Greek name instead of the Jewish name? Mm-hmm.
Let's go back to the Old Testament, and we'll talk about the Torah. Well, we're going to change the name of it. We're going to say it's the Septuagint. We're going to call him Moses, and his name was... I'm waiting. What was his name?
Moises?
Are you saying why do we not use it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you saying why don't we use the Hebrew pronunciation?
Why don't you call him by his name?
Yeah.
Just because we're not native Hebrew speakers.
Right, like even Jesus, we don't call by the phonetically.
We don't say we don't say Yeshua.
I didn't say it. Why doesn't anyone call him Yeshua? Why don't they call his mother Miriam? Why don't they call whoever the other one was, Saint Joseph? Why don't they call him Yusuf?
There are plenty of Catholics
Joseph
in the world who do call him that. If you're living in Israel, for instance. But there is a process of translation, and this is even older than Christianity. You mentioned the Septuagint. The Septuagint is not just the Torah. The Septuagint is the law, which is what Torah means, and the prophets and the writings. And in a Greek translation that's older than Christianity. So even before the time of Christ, there was the idea that these things were translated from Hebrew into Greek, and then eventually several other languages, Peshitta into Syriac, and then eventually into Latin, and so on. And that's because the point of it is for people to be able to read it and understand it. This is the inherent tension that any religion has. So contrast this with Islam. In Islam, there's the idea that you can't actually translate the Quran, and so any translation is really an interpretation, not a translation. And so there's a real strong premium put on learning Arabic so that you can study the Quran in its native language. And it's good, similarly, if people want to learn Hebrew and Greek so they can understand Scripture in the native language. And there are a handful of exegetical questions that it can be really helpful to speak Greek or speak Hebrew fluently so that it makes a little more sense. But we don't put that kind of burden on an ordinary believer. When you go into a new village that's never heard of Jesus Christ, we don't say, we better start Hebrew studies, we better start, a biblical Greek, because otherwise they're not going to be able to hear the saving gospel. That God comes to us in a way we can understand. The whole point of the incarnation is a sort of divine condescension, meaning God comes down to our level. And so likewise, the reason the scriptures are in the native language of people around the world is because he means for us to read them and to understand them. And that gets lost if we're required to understand not just Hebrew, but the kind of Hebrew spoken in the age of Abraham, not just Greek, but first century, like Koine Greek. That sort of thing would be a real burden to put on an ordinary believer, I think.
Angus?
Yeah, I'll give you that. Every time you say St. Paul, it makes my skin crawl, because that's not his name, and it's almost like rebranding. To me, it feels like rebranding.
Now, I would just say, Joe, and I'll let you respond to what Angus is saying. There has been a renewal among Christians, and certainly among Catholics, of appreciating the Jewish roots of Christianity. I feel like that's been going on maybe since the Second Vatican Council, where we're more willing and also just historically more able to talk about the Jewish roots of our faith.
Yeah, I think Brent Petrie has some fantastic books, Jesus and the Jewish Roots of the Eucharist, and so on, where he's looking at this organic connection between Christianity as we know and understand it, and the Jewish climate and soil in which it grew up, and the way that it really is a Jewish religion still. And that is something that I think we really do risk losing. And so I guess the point is well taken, that there is always a risk of just thinking of Paul as like an English-speaking American, and that when we conceptualize him that way, then we actually do miss a lot of what he's thinking about, a lot of what he's talking about. In the same way that, if I read Brothers Karamazov in English, there's a chance that I'm missing some of the Russian context, or anything that you read. Like understanding, well, who is the author, and situating in what the Germans call the Sitz und Leben. What's the situation? What's like the living situation of the person at the time that they're writing? I think that's something that there has been for the last 200 years, maybe, a real renewed interest in making sure that we're not just assuming his circumstances are like our circumstances. So I think it's a good thing to be constantly aware of.
Angus, I got to leave it there because I have to take the break, and every single line remains full, and I'm very grateful for those calls, and I want to make sure I get them. I don't know if you'd be interested in it, but I would be happy to send you our colleague Trent Horn's book, Answering Atheism. It might be of interest to you. It might not. I don't want to presume one way or the other, but if you would like it, please just hang on the line, and Edgar will send it up there to Nebraska to you. And if you would not, we take no offense at all. Why aren't you Catholic is our topic today. 888-31-TRUTH is the number. We'll be back with Joe Heschmeyer. And by the way, Joe, do you really want to be referring to Russian literature right now? I thought all things Russian. Have you noticed some of the pettiness towards Russian stuff? Like, I'm sorry, but that's going a little far.
This is very timely because when I was on Matt Fradd's show, as a joke, we had white Ukrainians, which is just a white Russian, of course. And people were very upset that they thought we were being very serious and we're just being very petty ourselves, when we were in fact being petty in a totally different, just trollish kind of way. Right,
like I've heard of schools not they're canceling the Russian literature on the syllabus. Don't do that. That's
Tsukowski's 1812 overture being banned. Like that's a total. That starts to look just like racism.
Yeah, that's not a way to live. That's a terrible way to live. And besides, we need the 1812 overture for our American fireworks shows on the 4th of July. All right, we'll be right back with more Joe.
Stay with us for more Catholic Answers Live.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connections' set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connections' website is homeschoolconnections.com.
I still have my sanity because of EWTN and listening to your station. Everybody needs to listen to positive things. If you only listen to the negative things, it just gets very bad. If it weren't for your uplifting and wonderful people that conduct your programs, I don't know if I could still be not crying.
EWTN, helping people grow in their love and understanding of God.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Joe Heschmeyer is our guest. I am your host, and all of our callers are not Catholic, and they've called to tell us why they're not Catholic. We love doing these hours, and we're also very grateful to the folks that call. So I do want to be attentive to make sure we get to everybody who's called. So let's go down to Amarillo, Texas. Mary, listening on St. Valentine Radio in Amarillo, Texas. We're glad to have you, Mary. Why aren't you Catholic?
Well,
I didn't hang up on her. She said, well, and then the phone cut out. So Mary, please call back. I don't know. I don't know what happened there.
She waited so long, got her moment, and then I feel bad for Mary
right now. That's the greatest answer ever. Well, and then she just left. I don't think that's what happened, Mary, but we want your call back. So hold the line open for Mary. Let's go to Adam in Oregon, watching on YouTube. We're glad you're here. Adam, why aren't you Catholic?
I'm not Catholic because I grew up in Mormonism. My question is why should I be Catholic?
Great question. Let me give a few answers. 1, the salvation of your soul. 2, the fulfillment of your humanity. And 3, because you love the truth. Now, I can explain any and all of those. But maybe the 4th reason I would say is if you are someone who loves Jesus Christ, and if you take him seriously in Matthew 16 when he says he's building the church and that the gates of hell won't overcome the church, and if you take, I mentioned in Acts 5 earlier that Gamaliel, the Pharisee, lays out this challenge, that there have been all these failed messianic movements that splinter and fracture and all of that, and kind of peter out when the leader of the movement dies. And it's one of the ways we know they're not real. That the Catholic claim is that for 2,000 years the church has stood here, and it can make that historical claim. And Mormonism, of course, can't. It's claiming, no, the church actually failed and had to be rebooted by a prophet in the 19th century in America. That we, both a Mormon and a Catholic would take that question of the keys and the church extremely seriously. But I think Gamaliel's challenge is very clearly that if the church failed in the 1st century or the 2nd century, or whenever you want to put the Great Apostasy, that's actually a disproof of Christianity. So that's a lot of different avenues. If you see one you want to hear more about, I'm happy to kind of give you a little more.
Well, let me give some clarification. I left the Mormon Church when I was 8.
Okay. Oh, okay. So you're just wondering, like, why have any religion at all?
Well, I guess you could say I was atheist. I'm 41 now, and I left when I was 8 years old.
I gotcha.
Well, that must have taken some bravery.
Yeah, I was not liked by the community at all. But
can I ask? Did you leave
shunned.
because of? Did you leave because you thought it wasn't true?
Yes, I didn't. I left because I didn't think it was true, and I also left because I think my friend oversold it for me when I was baptized in the Mormon Church. And when I was baptized, he said that I would feel the love of God. And I came from a broken family, and I just wanted my family back together. And
man, I'm so sorry. That's tragic.
That's awful.
And I want to apologize. I know we're not Mormons, but I want to apologize on behalf of your friend, because that's such a rough thing to do to a kid, to promise, like, hey, you know, this terrible tragedy you're experiencing, just undergo this ritual and then you won't feel that tragedy. You'll feel the love of God instead. That's a terrible thing to do to a person. And I'm sure he meant well, but that's awful. I'm so sorry about that. You know, you were right to not go where the truth wasn't. In other words, not being Mormon because it isn't true, that's enough of a reason not to be Mormon. And the flip side to that is, I think the best reason to be Catholic is that it's true. Now, there are times when being Catholic feels totally amazing, and there are times where it really does not. So I don't want to oversell it to you. Being Catholic is the beginning of a journey, and it's by no means the completion of it. But the completion of it is that this hunger you have for truth and goodness and beauty will one day be satisfied by a God who loves you infinitely, who loves you more than anyone's ever loved anyone. So I think that's the best reason to be Catholic.
What do you think, Adam?
Well, I'm definitely am curious, so that's why I'm calling in, because
I
was hoping you can help me get directed towards the truth and clarification.
Yeah, let me give you a very brief 5,000-year sketch, and I know I'm not going to do this justice. There is a longing in the human heart to see God. And so even when God reveals himself just a little bit to Abraham, and then a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, he's fulfilling something that's always been in the human heart, that we want to know, love, and serve God. We want to be known by God, and we want to be loved by God. And we want to spend eternity with God. You read the writings of pagans like, Aristotle and, Plato, when he's, recounting the symposium with Socrates. This is baked into us. We want union with God. It's why religion exists. And we don't feel that in the way that we all know we should. And we can't do anything on our end to close that gap in any meaningful sense. And every religion in the world has tried, and it has failed. It has come up short. And so the radical difference between those religions and Judaism and Christianity is that the Judeo-Christian message is that God is going to close the gap, that God comes to us because we can't actually go to him. Like the Tower of Babel is us trying to reach up to God. Pentecost is God coming down to us. The Incarnation is God coming down to us. Like these things are God's search for man, is what it's sometimes called, because our search for God without his help is totally fruitless. And so God ultimately enters history, not just through revelation, not just by telling us things, but from the second person of the Holy Trinity taking on a human nature. And that entrance into history isn't just a one and done kind of thing, but that endures. That in the church we see the manifestation of the incarnation lived out. And that's why the church, which is, if you know anything about the Catholic Church, you know it's very often incompetent and corrupt and can't seem to get anything done, and yet it's the oldest government in the world, and that it's survived all of the all of these much stronger, better human enterprises have failed and collapsed and crumbled, and this strange little church has continued to grow and endure. That's all a sign that God is in control. That's all a sign that in the midst of our ineptitude and our sin and our evil, that God is still active and working among us for our good and out of love for each of us. So that's why I'm Catholic, and that's why I think you should be Catholic.
Well, I definitely am curious, and I'm going to definitely pay a visit to my local church.
God bless you, Adam.
Excellent. Why don't we send you Trent Horn's book?
I was thinking I would send him. I'll send him both because it's so. Because you and I both had a similar idea. If you would like these books, I'd like to send them to you, Adam. Our colleague Trent Horn wrote a book called "Why We're Catholic," and it just goes through bit by bit why we're, various explanations of why we're Catholic and why we believe the specific things we believe. And then we have another book from another colleague of ours, Jimmy Aiken, called "The Words of Eternal Life: True Happiness and Where to Find It." And I would like to send you that book as well. So, and also, I'd love it if you'd call back maybe when Joe's on, and we can continue this conversation, because it's about the most inspiring thing in the world that can happen to people like me and Joe, for someone to say, I'm seriously considering it, because it is, and by it I mean the person of Jesus as given to us in the Catholic Church is worth considering. It's worth taking the time to consider, and we're so grateful that, and moved by the fact that you are. So you want to hang on the line and we'll send you a couple books?
Okay.
All right, and call us back when Joe's on.
Okay.
All right.
Can I ask something for everybody else listening, just to offer up a prayer right now, while we're doing the boring part in between now and the next caller, just for Adam's journey?
Yes, please do that. It's not when I'm talking, it's not the boring part between callers.
That's what everybody.
That's a
you didn't
horrible
know that's
thing
what
to
we
say.
call it.
No, can you pick up the line with Adam and make sure he gets those books before Joe's attitude turns him off to the whole Catholic This is not boring right now. This is the part people look forward to.
For prayers. You're distracting people praying right now.
Oh, I'm sorry. You just stop saying horrible things, Joe. All right. Let me think. Where am I going? Okay. I'll tell you what I got.
You're right. This is riveting. I heard Mary laughing in the background. I'm going to think.
The whole booth is laughing at me now, Joe. I hope you feel good about yourself. And write a letter. Write a letter about Joe. Noah in Wheaton, Illinois, watching on YouTube. You are up next, Noah. Go ahead with your... Well, no, let me just ask you this. Noah, why aren't you Catholic?
Well, thanks for asking. So currently I'm not Catholic because I've been Protestant my whole life. I really love the teachings of the Catholic Church. I'm so compelled by so many things. I'm currently Anglican because of circumstantial things. I'm not ready to convert. I'm in a community of Anglicans that I'm very rooted in. Having just graduated college, I have a lot of my classmates at my church. I am also not Catholic, partially because I just have a little bit of trouble understanding why the tradition of the church and why the authority of the magisterium, though mostly tradition, can define things that are necessary for salvation. It's the necessary for salvation part that is really the biggest thing for me. I had a priest I was just talking to earlier today saying, like, yeah, it's really hard for Anglicans to accept that, like, the dogma of the Immaculate Conception would be necessary for salvation. If that's the correct understanding, what I'm wondering is, why does the church define the Immaculate Conception as necessary, and also just how can I reconcile that? Like, how are there things that the church can define as necessary for salvation that are exclusively in tradition,
okay,
not
Joe?
in the Bible?
Yep, got you.
Yeah, great question. There's really two things in that. One of them is about how explicitly the Immaculate Conception is in the Bible or not. But I want to focus on the other half, which is the role of the church in defining doctrine. You see this as far back as Acts 15 with the Council of Jerusalem, that there's a controversy among Christians about what's necessary for salvation. Specifically in verse 1, that some men came down from Judea and were teaching the brethren, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. So there's a question of what is it of salvific import? Like, what things do I have to do as a Christian that are salvifically necessary? What do I need to believe? What do I need to do? And the Council of Jerusalem answers that, and it says, it seems good to the Holy Spirit and to us to lay no burden upon you greater than these necessary things, and then lays out things that it says are necessary for salvation. That's the church acting in an authoritative way on an issue of salvific importance, not just saying, what do you take it from Scripture?
Hang on, Noah, we're going to continue on the other side.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says Cy Kellett. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, Cy presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Have you enrolled in the Catholic Answers School of Apologetics? Let me ask you a more important question. Do you believe as a Catholic that you have an obligation to share the Catholic faith? In fact, the Church has answered this question, and the answer is that all confirmed Catholics are obliged to share the faith. It's actually in canon law. Catholic Answers is here to help you fulfill that obligation. Our School of Apologetics courses will equip you to help all the people you come in contact with understand what the Church teaches and why. A great place to start is with all the Catholics in your life. Learn the art of apologetics from the best of the best and start sharing the gospel today. Visit schoolofapologetics.com. That's schoolofapologetics.com.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. I am your scintillating host, Cy Kellett. Our guest is Joe Heschmeyer. He tries to bring me down, but he can't bring me down. I still feel like I'm in a great mood. I'm going to cry later when I get home, but I'm in a great mood right now. Noah,
unrelatedly though.
Yeah, completely. I do that every night. Actually, I go home and cry every night. Noah in Wheaton, Illinois, is on the line, and he's Anglican. He says he's not Catholic because look, the church goes around proclaiming things as necessary. That I believe these things. It's necessary for my salvation that I believe these things, and they're not explicitly in the Bible. As a matter of fact, the way Noah phrased it is they're not in the Bible, which is, on some things that I think, like for the Immaculate Conception, that's a perfectly fair thing for an Anglican to say to us. And Joe, you were talking about even in the book of Acts, there's the description of the church's ability to say what's necessary for salvation, because that's the very question having to do with circumcision that the church has to grapple with at the first council, the Council of Jerusalem.
Yeah, so I was starting to say in verse 28 and 29 of Acts 15, the church, in response to this question of what is salvifically necessary in terms of the Mosaic law, says it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us to lay upon you no greater burden than these necessary things. That you abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, and from blood, and from what is strangled, and from unchastity. If you keep yourself from these things, you will do well. Farewell. And so the remarkable thing there is that the church is speaking on a question of salvific import, not saying, here's our best scriptural argument. if you read the context of Acts 15, that's not what's going on here at all. And saying, here's what you're bound to, and then speaking on behalf of the Holy Spirit to do so. And what makes this more dynamic is that these prohibitions that continue at the Council of Jerusalem don't last forever. Like, as a Christian today, if you want to go get a rare steak that still has blood in it, you're not sinning. And in fact, we even see from St. Paul's writings in different Gentile contexts that food sacrificed to idols is nothing, he says. That this was a particular thing for a time and place. That points to the role of the church. In other words, if you don't have the church, the result isn't total freedom. The result is total confusion and chaos, and you get different people teaching different things. That's what we see at the beginning of Acts 15. People went out without permission from the church and were preaching heretical stuff. And different people interpret the Bible differently. And different people interpret the Christian message differently. And so the role of the church is to say, in this time and in this place, here's what you need to do, here's what you need to believe, here's what you need to not do, those kind of questions. And that's actually incredibly liberating and freeing. A majority of Protestants switch denominations in the course of their lifetime. That if you're left to your own devices without a magisterium, you're not going to get it right. And most Protestants have the humility to realize, yeah, I haven't always gotten it right. My beliefs have changed over time. I probably still don't have it right. And that's the danger of having no church that can check. I don't know if my beliefs before or now were the right ones. So the last thing I'd say is, from the outside looking in, it looks like the church is just laying down an extra burden with like the Immaculate Conception or fill in the blank. For that matter, the Christology stuff, whether it's like the two natures of Christ, the two wills of Christ, a lot of people who don't really understand the whole debate look at that and say, that looks like a lot of unnecessary stuff that the evangelists didn't see a need to define and declare. What's the deal with that? But from the inside, this isn't an extra burden. The church is saying, yeah, this is worthy of your belief. Christ does have two natures. He does have two wills, and he is hypostatically united. And now I know him better. His mother is the Ark of the New Covenant, as Luke 1 presents her. And so she is immaculately conceived to be without sin. And that tells you something about Mary, and it tells you something about Jesus. And so from within the church, this isn't some extra burden for like raising the cost of entry. It's rather, if you can trust the church, and Christ established the church so you can, then you can understand Christianity better. The more stuff gets defined, the more stuff gets declared. That, if some new doctrine is declared, that's something that's been disputed before, now a situation, a dispute is settled, just like the dispute in Acts 15 was settled. That role of the church in settling conflicts and making it easier for all of us to believe the same thing and to be united one in heart and mind, that's why it's happening. It's not to make it harder for people to convert.
No, I'm anxious to hear what you think.
Yeah, thanks for saying all that. My bigger concern is, like, okay, do I have to believe in the Immaculate Conception? Like, if I want to be Catholic, do I have to believe that to be saved? Or even, if I'm Anglican, do I have to believe? And I do believe it, for that matter. Which, for the record, like, I'm all on board. But like, why is it that it's necessary? If I'm correct in my understanding of a dogma, like, is a dogma necessary for salvation? And is specifically the Immaculate Conception?
Yeah, it is. But in the same way that, like, why is it necessary for salvation that you believe that Christ has two wills instead of one? Well, because ultimately the question is, do you trust that Jesus is who he says he is, and do you trust that the church is who he says it is? If you can say yes to those things, then it follows logically, necessarily, that any of these proclamations the church has made infallibly are trustworthy and reliable and have to be believed. In the same way that you don't, in other words, I would say, don't start with what do I think of each and every doctrine, and then get to, can I trust the church? Just like when you're approaching Jesus, don't say, what do I think about his, like, turning the other cheek thing? What do I think about his stuff about paying taxes? Don't start there, because you're putting yourself as the decision maker. Start with, do I have good reasons to believe he is who he says he is? And if the answer is yes, then accept everything he says. Even the stuff that makes you uncomfortable, even the stuff that you maybe don't see why he says it. He is, as someone once said, a teacher of strange things. Ah, yes. And, so likewise with the church. If the church really is who he says the church is, then you can trust her, even when you don't know why she's getting to the conclusion she's getting to. Like, if I just said, well, why is it important that we refrain from animals that have been strangled in Acts 15? I bet the ordinary Christian couldn't give a satisfactory answer then or now. But it was sufficient that you could trust that the church got this right, and people could then be united in their beliefs and in their practices.
Noah?
Yeah, thank you so much for talking about all that. Yeah, I will sift on that. As I'm considering being confirmed Anglican right now, it's been something that's been weighing on me, because the statement I have to sign to accept is I accept that the Scripture contains everything necessary for salvation, and so that's really what I'm wrestling through. Which, like,
right.
If tradition has things necessary too, then that's the big piece to consider.
That is, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Even something like, well, how do I know these books of Scripture are inspired? Most of them don't tell me. How do I know, like, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? They don't tell me. So there's all sorts of stuff contained in tradition that's not found in Scripture.
Right.
That both Catholics and Protestants believe as a matter of course every day.
As a matter of fact, a Catholic would
and
say...
if they didn't, they wouldn't have a religion. Like, if you didn't have tradition, you wouldn't have anything in Protestantism.
Noah, I'm going to say thanks. We're here to help. If as more questions come up, I hope that you will call, and God bless you, brother. Joe, I really appreciate that conversation, because I believe that you express the Catholic faith the way that I understand it, and I find it very helpful to hear it expressed that way, that essentially the faith comes down to an act of entrusting oneself to Jesus and his church, and that I don't have to resolve every difficulty. I don't have to. Now, I do find that as I, mature in the faith, for me, they have many things that were very hard to resolve. Like for me, at a certain point, the all-male priesthood was very, very hard to resolve. And I won't say that I'm, that intellectually I can explain it, but it's much easier for me to accept than it was at one time. Because there's just the faith comes down to a simple act of trust. Do I trust Jesus and his claims? Do I trust that he founded this church? If I do, I just accept all of it and then allow the Lord to get me there in his time.
And notably, you're not turning off your mind. You're just trusting. No. In the same way that if someone who knows soccer really well says, "Oh, this is a really smart strategy," you might say, I don't really understand anything about soccer. I don't get why this is a smart strategy at all. But I know you well enough to trust you that this must be. And then later, if you get to know the game better, you're like, oh, I see why this was so smart.
Yeah.
In technical terms, this is a distinction between what's called religious assent and real assent. Religious assent is just, I trust Jesus. I trust the church. I'm going to believe X. Real assent is, I see why they say X. And that's easier to believe in ultimately. That once you get why these counterintuitive things are true, then it's no longer as much of a leap. But you can still make the leap even if you don't see all of the reasons for it, and that's well and good.
Noah, thanks for the opportunity to talk about these things. I really, really want to get to Eric in San Antonio, Texas, listening on Guadalupe Radio, who's been waiting. And that means I have to do this break. It goes maybe 90 seconds, maybe 60, I'm not sure. But if you can hang on that long, Eric, we're going to get to you right when we come back.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
One time somebody said to me, why don't you air these people? And I said, no, because I don't think they're Catholic. He says, by what right do you have to say that? I said, I own the network.
Mother Angelica Live Classics. Every morning, 2 Eastern, on EWTN Radio.
A lot of people think that street evangelization involves yelling out of a bullhorn telling people that they're going to hell. Not so with St. Paul's street evangelization. Our methods are non-confrontational and effective. We simply offer information on the Catholic faith along with rosaries, miraculous medals, and prayer. Pope Francis wrote about how beautiful it is to see street preachers joyfully bringing Jesus to every corner of the earth. Street evangelization is fun and fruitful. Join us today at streetevangelization.com.
I got this big ad to read, but I'm not going to read it. I'll just say head over to shop.catholic.com for savings of 10 to 25%, in some cases even more, because it's our store-wide sale right now, shop.catholic.com. But I'm not going to take a lot of time on that because I really do want to get to Eric, who's been patiently waiting. And we ask people to call and tell us why they're not Catholic. I really feel like we have an obligation to do our best to have a good conversation with them. So Eric in San Antonio, listening on Guadalupe Radio, we're glad you're here. Why aren't you Catholic?
Hi, Joe. This is Eric here in San Antonio. I'm not Catholic, not for any theological reasons. It's more for its humanitarian impact on the world, for its crimes against humanity that it's still doing today, with its mass graves in Canada, the Rwanda genocide. 52% of LGBT children in Catholic families are more likely to commit suicide and things of that nature. And you guys are doing nothing to address this because you value church unity over people's lives.
I would love to look at each of those in turn if you'd be interested, Eric. But before I get into all the specifics, I want to concede the broader point, which is there have been a lot of ugly things done in the name of the church and by representatives in the church. And amazingly, like, you've only scratched the surface. Like, we could have a much longer list of here's some other horrible things that Catholics have done. And I mean, to be expected in one sense, right? Like, the church is more than 1 billion people. It's more than the population of China. So if you just said, what are all of the bad things any Chinese people have done in the last 2,000 years? You could have a pretty full episode of just that. Or what are all the bad things happening in China right now? You could have a pretty full episode. And so hopefully the church's track record is better than that of communist China. But I'm pointing out merely that 1 billion people, you're going to get some horrible stuff. In the particulars of the mass graves, I do think it's important to know that appears to be a myth. Meaning there was a big international scandal with this Kamloops Indian residential school. But not one body has actually been unearthed. And the mass graves that are alleged to be there are using some really questionable technology of ground detection that could be detecting things like roots and the like. And so the Federalist back in January had an article called "Not One Corpse Has Been Found in the Mass Grave of Indigenous Children in Canada" by John Daniel Davidson. And so if you want to know more about that history, it is worth knowing that this is one horrible thing attributed to the church that maybe just didn't happen. It may have happened. We don't know. But right now, there's not actually any good evidence that there's any mass graves to begin with in Canada. But having said that, you will find there were certainly abuse cases. There were certainly people who were not treated with their Christian dignity. And so I don't want to just let all Catholics off scot-free. Likewise, even though the Catechism is very clear that people who are same-sex attracted should be treated with Christian dignity, a lot of families don't live that out in practice and don't treat family members struggling in that way with the dignity that they deserve. And I think that's worth acknowledging, that we can both be against same-sex relationships and realize that they're not actually satisfying and that there's a wealth of sociological data that they're not satisfying, and still treat the people who struggle with that inclination with the dignity and charity that they deserve, that they richly need. And we often fall short of that. And for that, I, as a Catholic, am sorry, and I think a lot of Catholics are sorry and ought to be. But the last thing I'd say, and Rwanda. Well, in Rwanda, there's this fascinating thing with Our Lady of Kibeho, where Mary actually appears and kind of warns against this. And so there, the church's role is much more ambiguous, where Hutu and Tutsi Catholics are on different sides. Immaculée Ibegiza has some fantastic 2 books that I can think of that are really good, kind of exploring that from a Catholic angle. So I would say that's a much more complicated story. Philip Gurevich has a good book on that as well. But at the very end of the day, I would say this. Catholics regularly fail to live up to what they're called to be as Catholics. But that is an argument against our own shortcomings, not against Catholicism itself. Meaning, in a lot of systems, a lot of religions, a lot of philosophies, the horrors that it produces are because someone takes it too seriously. They become a radical, and they kill people in the name of it, and they do all these horrible things because this system, forces them in this really ugly direction. And what's really striking about all of the examples that you gave are that they're all cases in which the problem was that Catholics weren't Catholic enough, that they needed to be more like Jesus, not less. So they needed to believe more fervently and practice more faithfully Catholic teaching. And so if that's a problem, and I think you're right that it is, then the problem is that all of us need to be more Catholic, not that we need to be less Catholic. What do you think of that?
Okay. I hope you didn't try to just take up all the time of this call with that response. Give me 2 seconds to respond. As for the, it's not about what Catholics are doing. It's about what is the organization of Rome doing when these allegations are presented as a result of it. Yes, Catholics themselves can fail as individuals, but the institution itself. Like in Canada, when it first came to light, the first thing that Rome did was fire that priest that aired it, and they have yet to say anything as for an apology to it. Even though Trudeau has been calling for this, and Canada has officially apologized for that issue back in 2008. And in Rwanda, the priests that were in charge of the genocide there, Rome directed them to come back to Rome to protect them from extradition to be held accountable for war crimes. Rome continues to do this as an organization. It protects its priests at the expense of people's lives. And as for the LGBT issue, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops actively fought against a suicide prevention line just because it had its members on that line learn how to talk to the LGBT community. They actively canceled that suicide prevention line in the United States just because it's associated to LGBT. This is obscene, and you guys still do this as an official apology or as an official policy from Rome. These aren't individuals. These are institutional things coming from high up, from the Pope itself.
Well, again, I would say, in the case of, we're trying to touch on 3 issues. So I don't think I'm doing a very good job of being very thorough on any of those. But in the case of Canada, the Pope is actually arranging a visit to Canada to meet with Indigenous leaders. And so, yeah, he could just write an official apology. But and especially given that we don't know if any mass graves exist in the first place, he has spoken out against the horrors that have sometimes been associated with the treatment of the indigenous. But in terms of the specific thing here, to demand that he apologize for a thing that's not yet clear whether it happened or not, I'm not sure what that gets us or how that better serves Jesus Christ. But I certainly agree that there have been massive institutional failures. I don't know any of the story behind the suicide line that you're referring to. I'd be happy to read up more about that. I have not heard anything about that. I know there are suicide prevention lines, but it's certainly if they're giving kids bad information that's actually going to hurt them, that's not something we want, not because we don't care about the kids, but because we do. But I would just say, in any of these cases, yes, on the one hand, it's certainly possible there are institutional failures. It's certainly possible there's institutional cover-up. That's not something unheard of in the church by any stretch. On the other hand, I do think it would be very easy to paint with a very broad brush and miss all of the nuance with it. I would still say, even in the case of institutional actors, whether it's the papal nuncio or whoever, even the Pope himself, my earlier point still stands, that this is a question not of them behaving too faithfully to Christ and teachings of the church, but the people who articulate the teachings don't always live by them themselves.
Eric, I got to leave it there because there are still several folks on the line, and I have said I want to try to get to everybody. It's certainly true that the church is going through a time of reform, and it's the pace of the reform is not satisfying to many Catholics as well. If you want to continue to read about that, at least from good Catholic reporters addressing that, I suggest the Pillar Catholic. If you just type into your Googler the Pillar Catholic, then you get a kind of a sense of, even within the church, the level of the problematic level of the pace of change and of reform in the church, and the church is in constant need of reform. I know we've spoken many times before, Eric. We're always happy when you call. I know that was not as I know you would have liked more of a conversation, but I do have to get to the other folks who are on the line. So we'll just trust that the conversation will continue when you call again. We're talking to folks who are not Catholic, asking them why they're not Catholic. Jim in Portland, Oregon, listening on KBVM. You are next. Jim, go ahead with your no, I don't want to say it that way. Jim, why aren't you Catholic?
Hello?
Hi, Jim.
Hi. And I don't mean to be confrontational or rude, just analytical. It's the reason I'm not Catholic anymore, and I was for something like 44 years up until 1995. Growing up, it was a pretty bad experience. Not everybody has it, but I did, and I don't want to challenge other people's good experience, but it was like really huge emphasis on guilt and I forget, but it was like the pursuit of excellence through guilt mongering, and you get decades and decades and decades of that. It'll wear you down.
Right.
In the 90s, on Thanksgiving Day, I came down to some huge cases of depression. I got help for it, and I don't mean to be anti-Catholic either. I mean, there's a lot of Chesterton I admire. There was a Father Willie Doyle, I think his name was, a World War I chaplain. Admire him immensely. Father John Washington, one of the chaplains of the four chaplains off of the Dorchester that sank off of Iceland in World War II. It was sunk by a submarine. And but you know, that's it. And I don't mean to push it. And
Jim, I have to say.
Oh,
go ahead. Please finish.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, Solzhenitsyn said one in his book. Was it August 1914? The Russian army was going to have to withdraw from Tannenberg. They're having a terrible time. And this older officer gives a message to the younger officer. He says, "We can't. We got to bury our dead." He says, "We got to go." "No, we can't. We bury our dead." "Who's going to bury our dead?" And the older officer says, "The Germans will bury our dead. They're Christians too." And so for some of us Catholics or Protestants or something like that, you know, we're Christians too. And it's God will, you know, Christ will watch over us. It's like M. Louise Haskins' poem, it saved Ian McCorton's life in Burma. You know, it starts out, "I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year," and it finishes up, "safer than an own way." If you write down M. Louise Haskins, you'll find that inspiring. It's only 7 lines to that point.
I got to let Joe respond. I think the points you made have been tremendous, but we only have a minute left, and I want Joe to respond a little bit. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay. The very brief response I'd make is that if you think about it like a class, if someone is struggling in the class, you talk about like the possibility of failure, and you talk about all the punitive kind of stuff. You know, you don't want to drop out, but that's a terrible place to end up with any kind of education. You of course don't want someone motivated by that forever. You want them to say, "I want to go to class. I want to study more because I love this and I want to do very well." And so it is with Christianity, that the fear of hell, the legalism, the guilt, all of that stuff is really the basement. And no one is meant to live there in the basement. That's just, don't go below this. But you're supposed to draw higher and higher. There's a reason. Actually, I just wrote an article on Catholic.com if you check it out. Like, why is Catholicism so negative? That points to this. There's a floor but no ceiling because we're meant to go higher and higher. So I hope that gives at least a little hint as to why like legalism is the bottom but not the top of Christianity.
I'm sorry that was your experience of the church as well, Joe. And excuse me, Jim. I beg your pardon. Joe is the guy answering the questions. I'd love to send you. I hope you will check out Joe's article, because it seems providential that he just wrote that. Why is Catholicism so negative? You can find that at Catholic.com. I'd also like to send you a copy of Jimmy's book, The Words of Eternal Life. If you would like it, hang on and we'll send it to you. Joe Heschmeyer, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the 2 hours and doing it with us.
My pleasure.
I'm just so grateful for all the conversations. I want to thank all the non-Catholics who called to have these conversations with us. And if we didn't get to you, tomorrow's open forum. We'll do our best then. See you then, God willing, right here, Catholic Answers Live.